Yeah. Two more shirim. Two more shirim would be regular on the Mondays. Next Monday, and the Monday after. That's right, which will be the week of Tishrov. There's no reason for the shir then. No. On the Monday evening, and that will be the last shir till whatever, probably after some holidays. It's very quiet then. Yeah. So Elul will restart once we're back. Elul towards the end of August or beginning of September, whenever. So, they could, but from experience, it doesn't. It's very limited numbers, and then people go away different times. Do you know what I mean? So it doesn't you end up having like one or two people here and one or two here. Once the schools restart, that's the general. That's generally the time. I think so. Well, I think whatever. Yeah, normally, I don't know when the schools start because the schools may start in August. Well, so it's already restart then. We'll probably restart once the schools restart. That'll be the time to restart. Okay. Okay. Let's go. We are up to So let's just remind ourselves what we got up to. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. What was that? Yes. Right. Yes. Exactly. We just did Bar Kapora. So the issue was being ma'arer. We said that this was Bar Kapora. Bar Kapora says that if you're ma'ara and you're ma'ara again, okay, that Bar Kapora holds you have to make a macha at the end of every 3 years. And therefore, they used to be ma'ara many times. They used to, kind of claim ownership many times to make sure there was no questions over who was the owner. But he says that if he's ma'ara because of the first claim, then there's no chazaka, and if not, there is chazaka. So, if you've in other words, if an ordinary says the same thing, you've been using my land, you've stolen my land, that's a good macha, and therefore there's no chazaka. But if the first time he mentions that he was in theft, right, and the second time he says, for example, that it was a pledge for a loan or something like that, right? Then since he's changing the claim, okay, therefore it's not a good chazaka. Therefore, it's not a macha, and the chazaka works. Okay, so that's how it is. If you make a different macha in the second year, which contradicts the first year, basically you're agreeing that the original one was incorrect by definition, right? And therefore that's how it is. And it's like you haven't made any macha in the first 3 years, which means it's automatically a chazaka. Yeah, you understand? You make a macha at the end of year 3, and then at the end of year 6 you make another macha, but it's a different macha. That means you, by definition, admitted that what you said originally wasn't true, because that means he's got a chazaka the first 3 years. By definition, if you've admitted that the first objection you made was not true because you said something differently now, you've cancelled that out. If you cancel it out, by default, it's got a chazaka. So that's what we concluded with last time.
In the second 3 years become irrelevant. Once he's got a chazaka, that's it.
Once he got what was that?
Once he's got a chazaka after the first 3 years.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it. Yeah, exactly.
But we're saying that he'd have to make, if he makes a chazaka in the first 3 years, he would have to make another chazaka.
According to Bar Kapora, you have to make another chazaka. Another macha. Yeah. Every 3 years, you make another.
You leave him there for 3 years.
Yeah. That's what Bar Kapora holds. Right. Bar Kapora says you have to make a macha every 3 years, and that's how Rova Paskins. Right. Yeah. Although we said there's a machlokas Rashi and Toras on that. Toras disagrees with that, and he doesn't hold that off like Bar Kapora. Yeah. But now we're up to a new sugya, and this is about different things, and when you have to different things, not only macha but other areas as well. Very interesting, different cases that are brought as to when you do it in front of 2 people or 3 people, etc., etc. So we'll see. So Amar Rava says, Amar Rav Nachman, Limar Rav Nachman, when macha b'fnei shnayim, you make an objection in front of 2 people. The ein sarich lo mar ksuvu. You don't have to tell them to write it down. What does that mean? Let's see the Rashba on the very, very bottom of the page. You make an objection in front of 2 people, That means to say like two Eidim, you're making Mechal, you're saying in front of them, objecting to what this guy is doing. You don't have to tell him to write it. They write a shtar mechal. First time we've come across a documentation. Yeah, there's a document that's produced by these Eidim for the ma'arer, the person who's claiming ownership. Leos biyodo la'edus shemicha b'sech yamol. So he's got proof. Otherwise, how's he going to prove? It's his word against mine. I'm going to say you didn't make a mechal. So you got proof. Eidim signed a document saying this guy objected within 3 years. Even if he didn't tell them to do it. The zachin lo'ila adam shelo b'fanav shelo b'shusay. You're allowed to make as a chus. We always have this klal. You're allowed to mizakeh someone, do a chus for someone, even if it's not in front of him, shelo b'shusay, without his permission. To mistomani chalei, because it's assumed to be good. It's assumed that it's good for him. Okay. So in other words, there are two different dinim that Rava is telling us here, right? Number one, he's telling us that, like we saw the machlokus earlier on, as to how many people you have to object. Remember, we said that one opinion said you have to stay in front of 2 people. One people said you have to stay in front of 3. So Rava's saying that the halacha is you do it in front of 2. 2 people, not 3, right? Not 3. And we said before that it could be that's because we just hold you require edus. It's not that you require 3 people to make it public knowledge. As long as you set it in front of 2 people, that's enough, right? They automatically then go and write it down, right? They go and write it down. They don't need to consult you as to whether or not they should write the document, because you have a din of zachin adam shelo b'fanav. Right? That it's a good thing. It's automatically assumed to be something you would want, and therefore that documentation is written down automatically. We're going to see the reason why the Gemora goes on to this idea of whether they write a document or not is because Rav is going to contrast it with other cases where they cannot write it down unless you tell them to do so. There are other forms of instruction or other forms of we'll see, like where you admit that you owe something or whatever, where you don't write it down unless he asks you to do so, because it's going to be negative. It's not good for him. So that's what we're going to contrast it with. So this is how it is. Tosfos asks a very interesting question here. Look at Tosfos, the bottom Tosfos on the Omid. So the last one, Dibra Maskel Mecha. Mecha b'fnei shnayim, ve'ein tzarich lo maksuvu. Yeah. This Vim Thomas is Tosfos. Yeah, question of Uma moil haksiva. How does it help to write something down like this? V'holoi choshiv shtar. It's not a valid document. It's not a valid shtar. Im lo nasa midas mishu choivosoi. Unless it's done with the knowledge of the person to whom it acts in his detriment. The machzir. The machzir. How can you produce a shtar which, without the knowledge or without the consent, anything of the person to whom the shtar acts as a detriment to him? Kagoni says, we have a shtar mecher. You have a document of sale. It has to be written midas moicher. The seller has to be aware and sanction a shtar. A shtar mecher is a document of sale, right? That says that I sold to you something, right? Obviously, the moicher has to have that.
Yeah, but it's not a document of sale.
This is not a document of sale. But he's saying that any shtar is only a valid shtar if it's written with the knowledge of the person to whom it acts against.
Not really a shtar at all. It's like a witness statement.
Okay, so let's see. Well, shtar matana, he gives another example. Let's say a document of gift, midas nosin, right? The knowledge of the person who's giving. Otherwise, it's not a shtar. He's the one who's losing out. Or shtar malva, midas lova. And a loan document has to be written with the knowledge of the borrower. Otherwise, again, all these things has to be written with the consent or the knowledge of the person who's actually going to lose out. This is coming to answer your question. You're going to tell me, says Tosfos, top of the next Amud. You see, Paul? Yeah. The end, the last word on the first line of Tosfos. The edus nami lo choshev. It's not considered to be testimony. You got it? Memo Modanov. So right at the top, outer column, you got it? Last word on the line. The edus nami lo choshev. It's not considered to be testimony. This is answer your question. You know, at Tosis, you always got to like read 5 lines before you read. You understand what he's saying, right? So not always, but I'm saying he has Tosis answering your question. You're going to tell me this is not a shtar. This is just a document of testimony. He says, no, it's not. It cannot be as testimony because we have a basic halacha, a basic din in edus. You have to have edus mipihem from their mouth, from the mouth, the lo mipik sovom, not from the not from not writing. You can't write testimony down. You can only hear it. Has to be by word of mouth. This is in Parshas Yisro. A Pirish Rashi, but Pirish HaChumash. Unusually, he quotes Rashi and Chumash. We can't write down the edus in a document and send it to Beis Din. I thought it was in Parshas Yisro, but I don't actually think it is in Parshas Yisro. Where does it say Mipihem? This is.
In relation
That's a big question. Mipihem. I doubt it.
It's not the SS.
No. You think it's Mishpatim, Avrami?
Possibly.
It's a good guess. Could be. Let's have a look. One second. All right. Okay. It's very familiar, but I can't remember where. Okay. It's either there or it's in Shoftim. That's the other place it's likely to be. Mishpatim or Shoftim. What was that? Sorry, we're just in the second line of Tosfos on Daf Mem Amud Aleph.
What's the pasuk?
What was that?
What's the pasuk?
That's what I don't know.
Ah.
Yeah, it's just the word. Yeah, it's word Mipihem or whatever. Yeah. Okay. Anyway. All right. Bit of homework. Anyway, the point is Rashi says in Chumash they're not allowed to write their edus in an igeres and send it to Beis Din. So we are stuck. You understand? La halacha, you can no such thing as a witness statement, a written witness statement. It doesn't exist in halacha, big chiddush, right? It doesn't exist in halacha, a written witness statement. You have to give edus. You come in and you hear them. Yeah. Can't also do aid either. It has to be the person themselves. Yes. You have to, yeah. That's how it is. You can't have one aid saying it, right? So it can't be aiders. You're going to tell me it's a shtar, a regular shtar. It can't be a regular shtar. Because a regular shtar, you always have to have the knowledge of the person who's going to lose out.
Okay. In cases of married women who husbands fraud,
yeah, that might be different for an aguna. There are exceptions for an aguna, yeah. There are exceptions for an aguna, yeah. But generally speaking, that's how it is. So Tosfos says the Yeshloimar, yeah, 3 lines down. The takonas chachomim he. Takonas chachomim. Sheichoshev edus kadei levatel achazoka ve'edus koldahu. It's a special takon of the chachomim that it should be considered testimony to nullify the chazaka with any tiny bit of edus. Shebedovo muat mevatlem achazaka. With a tiny little detail, we can nullify chazaka. And this fits with everything we've said all the time, right? About how this whole process is really the chachomim stepping in, right, and working out the balance of, protection versus liability and everything else, right? This person who's bought the field and he's lost his documents, he doesn't have them. So on the one hand, we want to protect him. Chazaka in 3 years, you don't have your documents, but we're going to protect the buyer. On the other hand, that's a major liability for a potential original owner, because you're giving land to someone who doesn't have any documentation. So what we're saying now is that can be nullified with a small amount, tiny amount of edus, even though that wouldn't normally work. He says, even if it comes clear to us, that the machzik never heard about the objection. Right? As we've learned. It helps to nullify the chazaka, even if you never heard about it. The Gamba Maidor, Takanas Koming Ahatzalon. Okay, then he goes to talk about the other cases we're going to see soon. It's a very important idea, okay? Okay. So that's, and he says we're going to see the same thing in the other Takanas Koming coming up. You skip a few more lines in Tosfos. Skip to where it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 lines down where it gets narrow. Can you see that? V'oid Omer Abri. The Re further said, Shasham min Rabbeinu Tam. He heard from Rabbeinu Tam. Shenogim l'shalech ha'id meidusam megeres lebeistin. They were noheg. They did have the custom to send their testimony like a witness statement into Beistin. V'choshiv eidus. V'choshiv eidus. And instead of the eidus, v'had dashin in b'sifri. We narrowed it down. Sifri is Devarim. It's the Medrash on Devarim. Mepihem v'le mepik sofa. It's from their mouth, and not from the mouth of, their what they've written. This is very, very fundamental Tosfos. Right? That only comes to exclude someone who's mute, who's not able to talk. It's a big chiddush. In other words, don't explain when it says in the Torah mipihem. Don't say that means mipihem, that you have to always have edus by word of mouth and written edus is not valid. Don't say that. It doesn't mean that. It means that someone who is mute, who is unable to talk, is excluded from edus. But not that you can't. If a person is able to talk, he's also able to write it down. Yeah, 100%, massively. Different to Rashi, completely different to Rashi. Yeah. You know where it is? Al Pi Shnayim Eidim. Did you say that? It is, isn't it? Al Pi Shnayim Eidim.
2 or 3.
Yeah. You familiar with Shoftim? You
established the method. You established. You're going to find the right thing.
Yeah. Al Pi Shnayim Eidim. He doesn't bring it there. Where's the second occasion? What? You're right. It's Shishi. Yeah, very good. Well done, Jeremy. Spot on. Pesach Tezvov. It says Al Pi Shnayim Eidim. They shouldn't write it down and send it to Beistin. Another thing you learn, you can't have a translator between them. It has to be direct. You have to be able to hear it directly. But Rabbeinu Tam says, big chiddush, doesn't mean that. You can write it down as long as you're not a mute. If the person can't talk at all, he's excluded because he doesn't have a mouth.
Is that so they can then cross-examine him orally on?
Perhaps. If he's able to talk, then the fact that he doesn't talk and ends up just writing it, that doesn't prevent it. That's not prevent it working.
So it would be all right with that.
Yeah. And then he says, in the second paragraph,
If you say, that means we could have written evidence.
okay.
He's not around.
Yeah.
Worse.
Okay, then he talks about other things. Then he talks about other things. But anyway, there's a big chiddush, Tosfos. Yeah, big chiddush. You understand, right? So Tosfos says 2 things. What? Yeah, Tosfos says 2. We learned 2 things. What was that?
I think Paul's very important.
What was Paul says?
He's written it down. This Agus.
Yeah.
He's no longer alive. So there was Agus.
Who's no longer alive? Who's no longer alive?
The 8.
Isn't he?
Or the 8.
If no, it's just a question.
Oh, that's something else. No, that might be a different. Yeah, if he's dead. No, that might be something else.
We're not excluding written evidence.
Tosfos goes on to talk about other cases. Yeah, that might be another problem where he says the Gemora is in Ksubas, which talks about a person allowed to write down his edus on a star, and he can testify about it even after many years. That's when he remembers himself. But if he doesn't remember the edus himself, then it's no good. Right? That's what the Gemara says in Ksubas. That's when he doesn't produce the Ksav Yad in Beistin. it's complicated, obviously, when this would work or when it wouldn't work, right? To be able to write it down, right? But the fundamental point is that we have two answers to our problem. Toras asked a very straightforward problem. The problem was you don't have to say ksuvu. You make a machor, you object to the ownership of the field in front of two edim, and the Gemora says, Rava says, Rav Nachman, you do not need to say write it down. They can automatically write it down because it's for your benefit. Problem is, says Tosfos, how can that work? You can't have a star without the knowledge of the benefit, the person who's it's going to cause a problem for, right? Are you going to tell me it's Adus? Adus doesn't work in a written document. Two answers. The first answer is special takana. Special takana, that here, even though it doesn't really qualify as Adus because it's written down and it's not speech, but Azal allowed a tiny thing to nullify chazaka. As we see from the fact that I can make a machar, and even if we know that you never heard about it, it's enough to nullify the chazaka. Because all to do with the balance of how we protect the buyer, we protect the seller, etc., etc. Second answer to Tosfos is no, nothing to do with that. Simply that he goes. You can write down Adus. Adus can be in written form, and therefore this is a ksav Adus. In other words, he disagrees with that Rashi on Chumash, and you can write it as long as the person can talk. You're allowed to write it down. So those are the two answers of Tosfos. All right. So that's that. Now the Gemara Rava carries on. It gives other cases. Moidor b'lifnei shnayim, ve'ein tzarich lo maksuvu. Moidor can be done in front of two witnesses, needs two edim, and you do not need to say kasuvu. Now you don't need to say to write it down. Now, what is moidor? Now, moidor is a fascinating thing. A moidor is, now if I tell you where you're familiar with the word moidor, no, yeah, that's the word. What does it mean? To announce or to inform. Yeah. Right. Okay. But where are you familiar from a tefillah that we say what? Toras Nedarim. Martin, I was on the ball. Yeah, Modani's. Okay, the word is similar. But where do we say in Toras Nedarim? Hareini Mosem Moda'a Lifneicha. The second bit. Impressive. What? 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 Toras Nedarim is split into two parts. Yeah. First part is you ask for Hatorah, right? And the Dayanim give you Hatorah. Right, the three Dayanim say whatever, whatever, yeah, and then you say another paragraph. It sounds like that, right? And then you say another paragraph. I hereby make a declaration in front of you. Shekol, where is it? Let me just find it somewhere in here. Shekol, what's it called? Shekol, basically, kol neder. Here we go. Tov Lamed Aleph. Tov Lamed Aleph. That any neder I'm going to make in the coming year should be basically null and void. Yeah, that's the second part of Toras Nedarim. Here it is. I'm nullifying from here onwards. You understand? You make a declaration. Yes, you make a declaration that you're being nullifying from now any Nedarim you make in the future year. Now, there's a big question in halacha how this works, whether it works. Does it work only if you didn't remember this when you actually made the neder? A whole question about how this works, okay, and whether it works and to what extent it works. But this is a very interesting thing. You see here that the concept that I can make a declaration in advance if I know something detrimental is going to happen to me. I can make a declaration in advance in front of, let's say, three Dayanim, or maybe in front of Edim, as we're saying here, two Edim, that I'm nullifying this thing that's going to happen. That I don't want to do it. I'm being forced to do it, and I'm making a modah, a declaration. I don't want to do it. Here, it's about Nedarim. I'm being mevatel any neder I might make in the future. But fundamentally, conceptually, the idea is that I can make a modah, a declaration that I'm going to do something, and you should know it's under duress, and I don't want to do it. I'm therefore nullifying it in advance. And this is a major problem for Botei Din, because the concern is the person walks into Beis Din to give a get, for example. This is a live problem, big problem. Walks into Beis Din to give a get. And how do we know if he hasn't gone to two Eidim beforehand? And he said, the get that I'm about to give, I have no wish to give it. I'm being forced to give it. And I'm being mevatel all my das and rotzen and everything else that I'm going to say in Beis Din, because that's what happens in Beis Din, right? He doesn't write the get himself. He writes a points of sofa. He makes a kinyan on the quill, and on the pens and everything else and whatever, and he points to the sofa and the sofa writes it and everything else, and being mevatel it. Don't want to do it.
Because Rabbi Gamliel Hasakin made those to kind of to avoid those kinds of situations.
What?
Well, that was where someone goes to base before the person might go to base it.
Yeah.
And he could say, I've given my shliach a get to give to Isha.
Yeah.
But actually, I'm nullifying that.
Yeah.
And that was previously allowed, but Rabbi Gamliel banned that on the basis of Tikkun.
So that's slightly different. Right.
Otherwise, people put in trade.
That was the Gemora in Gittin, right? They'll be mevatel the shliach. Yeah, exactly that. That's a very, very good point, but it's a bit different because you're being mevatel.
After you've done it.
Yeah, that's where you appoint a shliach and you mevatel the shliach before he arrives.
She doesn't know when she's going to have a get.
She gets it. She thinks, and then she could be a tunnel, or she could be Maseris. It's problem.
So,
and he said he can't.
Yeah. You can't do that, but I think that's a bit different because I think that's talking about shlichus. You can't be mevatel a shlichus. You also, if you did do it, but there was a machlokas in the Gemara, right? What happens if you do it? No, does it work or not? If you did it, you're not allowed to do it, but if you did, see, that's another problem. See, for example, there was a case that came up recently in the Beis Din where, and I wasn't really involved because I don't really do Gittin very much, but I just heard it was being discussed. Very serious problem. Someone had written the get was written, everything else. The wife was due to come in a day later or 2 days later to pick up the get. He phones up the Beis Din and says, "I've changed my mind." Now he's not allowed to do that, and by doing that, and this might be linked to this Gemara, he's makabel on himself a cherem, which is really serious, right? There's a cherem; they impose a cherem on him, or that's by default by doing it, but you still can't stop him. He still can do it. You can threaten him, and you can but if he's prepared to accept that cherem,
He stops the get.
can stop the get. Can stop the get. But this is not even that. This is less than that. This is not like where the get's been written or whatever. This is where you can make a moidor. You can make a declaration that what I'm about to do is under duress and I don't want to do it. And that is what a moidor is. Now, how and practically, how the Beis Din, how Botei Din worldwide stop this is they insert into the process of every get and chalitza, interestingly, a process of bittul moidors, which means that before the get is written, when they appoint the shliach at the beginning, I think it's done before the sofa is appointed. I think they make the husband declare that he nullifies any moidos he might have delivered.
That was a bit
Yeah. No. You said circular, but it works. Because you declare in Beis Din that in the event that you have done anything beforehand, and you've spoken to anyone, and you've done anything that has made a declaration saying, I don't want to do this, and I'm declaring that I don't want to do this, I'm being forced to do it, here in Beis Din, I nullify all of that. So therefore, it is now something I want to do. And interestingly, when in between the appointment of the sofa and the writing of the get, it takes a few hours, right? It's not quick. So the husband is allowed to go off and he doesn't have to wait while the get's being written. Then he'll come back and he'll deliver the get to the shliach, or if it's miyad liyad, he'll give it to the isha, he'll give it to his wife there, right? But whatever's going to happen. But while he goes off, the Beis Din warn him and say, don't talk to anyone about the get. Like just in case.
Why can't he
Do you understand? Just in case he meets someone, a couple of agents says, that get the right, I really don't want to, because you understand all these concerns. So they say you shouldn't talk to anyone about the get during the next few hours.
Why can't he be asked to be mevatel anything he might say before the get is delivered?
Well, maybe
That
it could
might
be, maybe I don't know, but I don't know. Maybe it's in that kind of extra precaution, or they've done the bittul already, so they're not considering you do it again. I don't know. Yeah. Okay, but and it's complicated to know. But the point about bittul modos, the way it works is it's a retrospective nullification of any modos that you might have to do.
Yeah.
It's this week's parsha, okay? It's this week's parsha, right? Matos, yeah? And Nedarim, yeah? So the power of the spoken word. That's the whole message of Parshas Nedarim, right? It's unbelievable, We believe that there is incredible, that you affect the reality through what you say, the koach that you have. That's what Nedarim is. That's what all this represents. You can say things and they have a real effect.
Yeah.
That's what it is. The machshava.
Machshava preceding the speech.
No, well, but in terms of impact, the machshava is not can't have the same effect as words. Yeah.
We have what's being Kedusha. I think the fourth pair talks about the idea of change the status. Why doesn't make it by force?
There might be certain things. So, but even like by kodshim, pigul, it has to be, I think, by word. Even though it says machshava, I think it's a word.
If you want to make something Kedusha, you designate it.
Okay, there might be discussion about that. All right, maybe how it works and what your thought, whatever. But normally speaking, it's spoken. It's a spoken thing. The power is the speech. Yeah. Look, if you now let's see Rashi. Here's what you got to be covered. Let's see Rashi, top of the Omid. Misha ansu limkar. Rashi sets up as the following scenario: they force someone to sell something, and he's being forced to give his own property, and he doesn't want to. And to write a shtar mechira, or matana, or a shtar of the gift, in front of Edim. That's what he's being forced to do. He needs to be modia, to inform beforehand, lishnei Edim, to two Edim, velomar, and say, du'u lochem, you should know, shemachira zu, or shemachira, they look at the Bach miss out the word zu, shemachira o matana shall sodeh zu, that this sale or gift of this field, sha'ani rotzela sos leploini, that I want to do, or that I'm going to do for so and so, shelo b'ritzo nafshi eser. It's not something I want to do. It's not b'ritzo nafshi. Ki onsani umachricheni bal korchi. I'm being forced, right, to do this against my will. Hechrech is like also word for forced or whatever, being compelled. Yeah. And there should be nothing and no substance in this document that I'm doing. And today or tomorrow, Tovano le bedino, I'm going to bring him to Beis Din, and I'm going to make the shtar false on the basis of your mouth. How? Shemasarti medalif nechem, on the basis of the fact that I've given over, I've informed in front of you, a modor in front of you, kodim shenasa shtar, before the shtar has been written. I hand it over. Masira, you have handed over. So in other words, that's the way I'm going to mevatel it. I'm telling you now, I'm going to mevatel this document that I'm about to write on the basis of you, because you are going to turn up the next day and say, hold on a second, cancel the sale. He told us that this sale he was writing was garnished. This only works before the writing of the shtar, but afterwards, it's not worth anything. If so, all documents in the world, when he regrets it, after they've been made, and handed over kashrus properly, he'll come to disqualify them, right? So clearly, this can't work after you've written a document. Otherwise, it's a real get out of jail free card, isn't it? You can sell your house, and the next day you go in front of two Edim and say, change my mind. And then you can rebuttal the shtar. Of course you can't do that, but you can in advance.
So that's still equally open to abuse.
I know, the lawyer is terrified by this, right?
Someone's selling a property at a low price, or even a reasonable price. And he wants to get, he just beforehand does a secret deal with Nathan and says,
Scary, no? Scary.
You need a clause in that says.
You need a clause. You need to bid on the dog. That's the point. You need to bid on the dog. That's the way around it. It'll be a standard clause. To get around this problem, I'm assuming, but just like I do with Gittin, it'll probably be a standard process that in the sale, in the shtar of sale, it will be an admission, sign here, you are hereby nullifying any pre-modaos that you might have done. That's the way, that is the solution to it.
You can have it. We have like clauses in contracts about the fact that you have the right to sell this item and that you haven't promised or
yeah, it's a similar thing, exactly. They do contracts generally cover this type of thing, though, like similar things, right? That you might have anything you might have done.
It's not so much on English, but
does he have to prove that it's
what? Interesting question. Jeremy's question is, does he have to prove that it's Baal Korcho? Don't know. It doesn't think not necessarily. Not necessarily. He can make a declaration in front of Eidim, and the Eidim will turn up the next day and say this whole process was fraudulent. He didn't want to do it. He made it clear to us that he doesn't want to do it, and therefore he can nullify it. And if the buyer, didn't go through the process of being mevatel these modos, well, it's his own problem. He should have done it. Because I'm assuming that was how they would get. They would. So otherwise, any sale is open to abuse. You can ask, why should this be allowed in the first place? That's what we're struggling with. But how do you protect someone who's being forced to do something? He's being forced to sign here. Here's his hand. Sign here.
Well, actually, if it was forced, you shouldn't need anything afterwards to come on later and challenge.
But how do you prove it was forced? You've got your son. You've signed the document. You've signed the document. How are you going to prove it? You've signed the document. Signed.
Someone's going to lose out because usually it's been sold on to someone else.
Yeah, it's been sold on to someone else. Yeah, but yeah. No, look, it's a valid point. It's a valid point. But then either way, it does exist. Let's see the next Rashbam. He goes into a little bit more. Now, they don't have to write. He doesn't have to tell them to write it because clearly, shtar modor, to write this document of modor, to write it out in a shtar, this idea of modor, is not something that you need to tell them, the Adam, to write down because it's obviously for his benefit to write it down. Klola de Milsa, and by the way, that Tosfos says, Tosfos had the same problem as before, as the same question, right? You know what? How can you write it down? It's a detriment of the guy it's being sold to. The same thing. B'takonos chachomim, he says. Lahatzel hane'enas. It was a takonos chachomim to save a person who's under duress, who's being forced to do something he doesn't want to do. Klola de Milsa, says the Rashbam, kol midi deschosuloi. The klal is anything that's beneficial for him. Eino edim srichin litor lemenu rishus. The witnesses do not need to ask permission, right? Why doesn't it list them all together? The lemas follows mecha umodah, the kinyan. We're going to see kinyan soon as well. The kinyan acquisition b'fnei base is in front of two. You don't need to tell them to write it. Why don't you group it all together? This is because Rava was quoting all of them in the name of Rav Nachman. He didn't hear them all in one day. He heard each one separately. And then Rava grouped them all together in order as he heard them. You with me? So that's why these are listed as separate categories, even though it could have listed them all in one group. V'hainu, says Tos Rashbam, what I said to you before, this is the kasvinon bittul modoi. That is what we mean and why we write, we, him, contemporary, write this nullification of modois b'shtare mechira or matana. You see, in the documents of sale and gifts, we include an automatic clause cancelling out any modois. So me atalo toil ha-modah, because now the modah will not help. With the get, the mahani bitzel ha-modos, the nullification of modos works. And the same thing applies with any form of documentation.
It's not in English law contracts because going on that craft is to do
What we're seeing here, the practice has not changed the time of the Rashbam.
Yeah, it's always fascinating when you learn the Gemora. Yeah, it's always fascinating when you learn the Gemora and then you learn something in Rashbam or Tosfos or Rashi, like Tosfos as well. They often do this. You have to know how to look for it. You have to know how to find it. But they'll say, and this is what we do, and that is a contemporary commentary. So the Rashbam is saying, this is what the Gemara says, and with this Gemara, I will explain to you, like halacha l'maisa. You want to understand why it is that whenever you have a shtar of a mechira, you see this strange clause about nullifying on bittul modos. Well, this is it. This is why. This is why. And I say this is Rashbam would have been 700 years, 800 years after the Gemara was written. You have to remember it's not that long. Yeah, Rashbam is writing his commentary. 700 years, Gemara was completed 500, 600, 700 years later. The Rashbam was writing 800, whatever maximum. It's not that long afterwards. That's when the Pirush is being written, and it's commenting on what happened. How they used to apply the halacha. Yeah. I mentioned before that you can get online manuscripts, the earliest manuscripts of the Gemara, which don't have any Pirushim on. These are all available online now. I think on Sfaria, they're on Sfaria. Some of them date from the 12th, 13th century, the earliest of the 13th century. They hadn't yet printed like the Rashi or the Rashbam on the side. So you have many, many more. It's much smaller. It's just the text of the Gemara. So there's a lot more.
There was a guy in Sherwood Road, the first house. He had Sprung dating back like 1100, 1200.
Right.
It was all gentlemen.
Yeah.
Did
It's
those
collections.
Gemoras have the same page, same dustin?
No, of course not. The pagination was an intro the Vilna Shas. Bomba. No, Vilna. This is the Vilna Shas. Yeah. This is Vilna. Yeah. This is the Vilna pagination. The standard pagination of the Gemora, Daf in the Gemora is the Vilna Shas, which was from the brothers Rom. The first Hotzah Salmon of Achim Rom Tov Reish Mem Gimel. Tov Reish Mem Gimel. 150 years ago, whatever. No.
That's very recent.
Yeah. That's when before that it was totally different systems. Yeah. Once it was the standard edition. Yeah, there was a lot more Gemara's printed after that. Okay, so that's the next case. Now the next one, the third case of Rava is Hodah. Hodah b'fnei shnayim v'tzorech lo maksuvu. Admission has to be in front of two, and then you do need to tell them to write it. So let's see the Rashbam, 3 lines down where it gets white. Someone who admits to someone else, to his friend, base in front of 2 people, shechayev lo mona. He is chayeved him a mona. He owes him a mona. That's what he admits to. Tzorech lo maksuvu. He has to write ksuvu. Shetzavim alova lichtov lo shtal amal v'leidus. The borrower commands to write a document to the malva, to the lender, as testimony. To kol shah. Right. Pardon?
Borrower insists
the borrower is admitting that he owes something. So he has to tell the borrower has admitted that he owes money. He has to instruct the Eidim to write it down. That anytime he wants to claim his debt, he'll be able to produce this document against the borrower. No, Jeremy, don't.
The Eidim are acting on whose behalf?
Well, that's the point. Really, they're going to end up acting for the other party.
The lender.
Yeah. Let's say you owe £100 to someone, and you're feeling in a tshuva mood because it's the 3 weeks, and the Rambam says you should involve yourself in tshuva, for example, whatever. Or it's a tanas, and you feel like you want to be involved in tshuva. So it's the middle of a ball. It could be either, whatever. Yeah, maybe he doesn't have any documents, whatever. So you go in front of 2 agents, and you say to them that you're admitting that you owe £100 to Ruby. Now, those 2 Eidim are not allowed to write that down as a formal shtar and hand it to the lender unless you've instructed them to do so. Why? Because it's to your detriment. And the din is you can't be chovin la'odom, you can't cause a detriment to someone unless it's in front of them. He says he's owed the money, but there's a detriment to having it as a malva b'shtar instead of a milva alper. A milva b'shtar is more problematic. There's more weight to it.
Why would you do it though? Why would you make that admission? Isn't he running the risk of it being written down? Saying, no, what have you done? So it's like asking for trouble.
Well, he is asking for trouble. Yeah. He's asking for trouble by admitting it, but he knows that he wants to do the right thing. He's being moida. He's being moida, but that's fine. He's being moida. He's actually being a good boy. He's doing tshuva, but it doesn't mean he wants to go so far as to make it a milva b'shtar. Look what Shom's going to spell out. Without the permission of the borrower, ein kosvin. You don't write anything down. Because it's a detrimental for him. It's a debt for him. It's bad for him to have a documented loan. Since it's on the borrower to write, and he didn't tell the agent to write it down, you could say, it could be that he doesn't want to make the debt that he owes into a loan, a documented loan, a milva b'shtar. Until now, it was a loan by word of mouth, an oral loan. Okay, you understand? There's a difference in a milva b'shtar and a milva b'shtar. A milva b'shtar, you have more power. You can claim milva b'shtar. You can go to kuchos. People who have bought property from him, you can claim from them. I think if the loan, I think it's a milva b'shtar, you can claim with shabodim property that was yours and that thing you sold subsequent to the loan. You can go to the buyers and you can claim, here's my document. You understand? It's got more power to it. So it doesn't mean just because I admitted I owed the money, I owe the £100, doesn't mean I want to take it. It means I admit there was a malva pair, not that I admit there was a malva b'shtar. So unless I've told you to write it in a shtar, don't go ahead and write it down. Even though he's admitted in front of witnesses, so what's there to talk about? No, Ne'eman hu loyma kol shor sheyirtzeh parati. He's believed to say at any time he wants, I paid it back. To Chaim along, because we hold Hamal v'lachaveru be'edim, someone who lends someone else in front of witnesses, ein sorech lepara be'edim. You don't have to pay him back with witnesses. That's the halacha. Even if you lend someone money in front of edim, he doesn't have to make the repayment in front of edim, and therefore he can always claim and say, I paid it back already. It's true I admitted last week I owed £100. You know what? This week it's been paid back, magically. But now the guy's got a document. Ein halova ne'eman lema parati. He's never going to be believed now, the borrower, to say, I've paid it back.
Does he take the star? Because he would.
Because there's a star, I need Aiden. Elohim Cain, unless he obviously Aiden, he has to bring witnesses, Shapara Bifneim, okay? He has to bring witnesses that he paid back in front of them. Even if the lender produced upon the borrower ksav yodo shalova, the written handwriting of the borrower, shu chayav lo, that he is chayav, he owes him money, govim and achosim b'nei chorin, he's allowed to claim from at least property that is freed property, not property that's meshubah to someone else, that's been, someone else has bought from him. The einu ne'eman lo parati, and he's not believed to say, I paid it back. How much more so, if there's a documentation, there's a document that's got witnesses on that you owe money, you're definitely not believed to say, parati, I paid it off already. So all he's doing, let me just explain what Hashem is doing. All Hashem is doing is explaining why it might be that why it is to the detriment of the borrower to have this loan in written form, and why the Eidim who heard him admit that he owes the money cannot off their own back go and write it down in a shtar. Because once it's in a shtar, the borrower's capability and power to, his scope for sort of claiming that he's paid it back is vastly reduced. Because if it's only an oral loan, even if the loan took place in front of Eidim, I'm believed to say I paid it back, even not in front of Eidim. Because we say, Eidim, if you lend someone in front of witnesses, you don't have to pay it back in front of witnesses. So if you can claim I paid it back,
if you lend it in front of witnesses,
you do not have to repay it. But if, that's halacha. And therefore you'd be believed to say parati, I paid off. However, once there's a document, once there's a shtar, you're not believed to say parati.
No,
you have to have witnesses that support it. And the Rashbam says, even if the malver, the lender, just has the ksav yad, which is less than a shtar, even if he just has the ksav yad, a handwritten text from the borrower, and I owe you, you're not believed to say you paid it off unless you have witnesses. And how much more so if it's a shtar? You with me?
Yeah. Because I guess if you're lending without shtar,
no.
If you're lending without shtar, you're running a risk.
Yeah, it's just much more. Yeah. Again, we're not suggesting. Let's be clear. We're not suggesting, right, that we're not suggesting that the guy. It's not that the guy is going to be a fraud. It does sound a bit like that. It does sound a bit like that. It does sound like that. Hashem's aim is not to try and find him a way to be fraudulent. He's trying to explain why it is that it's clearly to his detriment to have it written down as a shtar. That's all he's doing. It's a chov. We say zachin adam shlebefonav ve'ein chovin la'adam. You can't cause a detriment to someone unless he has instructed you to do so. And if he did not instruct them to write it down in a document, yes, you can't do it. You're going to tell me what's the difference? He's admitted that he owes the money, so clearly he owes the money. So what's the difference? Let me write it down. The answer is no, because having it written down reduces the scope for the borrower to subsequently claim that he paid it off. So you'll tell me, why should we protect the fraud? The answer is because maybe he did pay it off.
Yeah.
And now he's not going to be believed. He's not going to be believed when he says I paid it off unless he has Eidim, because it's got a document. There's Raham,
The real detriment, a minimum detriment is that he now has to produce Eidim because there's a shtar. So
exactly.
So that's a detriment.
Yeah.
To organize
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. That's something you don't have to consider him to be.
About being dishonest.
Yeah, it's not that he's being dishonest. He's not dishonest. It's just it means you'll have to bring Eidim and everything else. Yeah, you can look at it like that. It's not good for him, and therefore that's why if he is moida, if there's a hodah b'fnei shnayim, If there's an admission that takes place in front of two Eidim, they do not write it down. They do not write it down unless they're instructed to do so. All right? That's how it is. Okay. The next case is Kinyan, but we'll leave that Mitzvah Hashem for next time. How you make Kinyanim. Okay, yeah. Very fundamental pieces, lots of applications. Take care, Romy. Yeah, very important, Absolutely.